Yeah, to your point, I think especially for younger people, if you're like 18 to 25 listening to this podcast, you got to get involved. The power you have when you're a kid, when you're younger, young adults, is voting. You may not have a lot of influence elsewhere at your job or whatever, but you have a vote. Decisions are going to be made for you if you don't want to voice your opinion. Well, everything that's going to happen in this election, everything that happens in your local elections, everything that happens in your state elections is going to affect you directly. And unless you want people who are, the average age of a government representative is in the 60s, unless you want boomers making decisions for you, you have to get involved. You could probably go on TikTok and look up an initiative. You could watch video on those and make a decision, make an informed decision, because that's going to affect you directly. And that's how you have your voice heard, is voting.
And I mean, when you talk about getting involved beyond voting, you can call your representative, you can email them, you can go to their office. Like, they legitimately work for us. What is good, y'all? It is your boy, Jonathan Dumas, and this is Highly Visible and a Little Misunderstood, the podcast where we talk to the people we see every day because we don't know what we miss until we miss them. And we are back again, y'all. Thank you so much for your patience as we drop the episode just a few days later. I'm dealing with some health stuff. I'm fine. But I just got to be more careful on the basketball court. That's all that. Hopefully you had a chance to check out my most recent episode with my friend Betty Chan, the authenticity coach, in our new series, Performing Authenticity. That was such a good episode. It's already actually going up on downloads. So go ahead and check that out on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We're going to keep the party rolling next week with Performing Authenticity series. But I wanted to take a quick detour this week because, it's election season. And this isn't just any election, as you probably already know from the texts, emails, conversations, social media posts, TV ads, all the things that you're probably being bombarded with, because we have this binary choice between Donald Trump and VP Harris in what I believe, honestly, is one of the most consequential elections, if not the most consequential election in our lifetimes. I will say, again, is we're going to be back on track with our diving into some incredible stories with my new favorite author who's got an amazing children's book coming out. It's already out. What am I talking about? And I can't wait to share that with y'all. So stay tuned for that next week. But this week, as y'all probably already know, if you've been tapping in with the show for the longest time, I'm a political science nerd. I'm also a policy nerd, studies nerd, data nerd, anything like that. And because this is such an important election, I wanted to talk about it because I just felt I needed to, wanted to, actually. That's more so. I didn't need to. I wanted to. That's the actual thing that I wanted to say. I'm actually doing this with my longtime friend, best friend, Gustavo, who is a fellow political science nerd and enthusiast. And we're going to be diving deep into the debates that are really taking over the headlines, our lives. So we're going to be discussing the economy, immigration, and the very foundation of democracy, I guess. And we're going to really be unpacking the distinct paths that were laid out by Trump and VP Harris. We're exploring what their platform means for our country's future, as in what happens if Trump or Harris wins. What do we do, right? How do we move forward? But this isn't just a policy breakdown. We're talking about real implications for real people, because as much as we nerd out about this, we hear political pundits talk about this. This is our lives. This is real. And I think even from Gustavo's experience, which he'll share as an immigrant to the U.S., and even my own experiences as somebody who grew up to paycheck, who believed in the political system and really is, at this point, disillusioned with it, there's a lot that is going on and there's a lot at stake. And so we just talk about all of that. So whether you are a political junkie or just trying to wrap your head around the chaos, because it truly is chaotic, this episode is packed with insights, spirited debates, and some solid practical takeaways to help you think critically about your vote. This conversation is real, it is raw, and as always, a little misunderstood. Just how we like it. All right, so let's get into it with my conversation with Gustavo. So, Goose, what is up, G? How are you doing? Thanks so much for coming to the pod. What's going on?
What's up, man? Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
When I was thinking about this podcast, or an episode this week, as you know, I'm a political science nerd. That's how we met and connected literally, how long ago was that? 8-9 years ago?
Teesh. I've been married for 7. You've been
Yeah.
married for 7. We met before
Yeah,
8 years
8 years
ago.
ago.
Yeah,
So that's how we connected political science and MMA, baby. There we go.
that's
Yeah.
it. That's my whole life.
And so like you're one of the few people that I like legitimately nerd about, debate on, do all this stuff with. So when I thought about this, I was like, I could do this by myself, but like why not have one of my, really good friends on here, talk through it, debate on some stuff, get into it, the nitty-gritty.
You can say
Can
best.
I
You can
say
say
best? I
best.
didn't
It's all
know if
good.
I
It's
had
all good.
permission.
You can
All
put a
right,
label on it.
we,
I'm ready for that.
I thought we were keeping 8 years in. I thought we were still,
You don't have to keep it casual with me, baby. I'm cool.
But yes, Goose is one of my best friends. First, before we dive into any of that, bro, I did I take my magic mind? I did take my magic mind. Actually, I did. This little product right here. Did I tell you about this?
All right. What is that?
Okay,
No, you didn't.
so
What's up?
I'm partnering with this company called Magic Mind, and it's like a productivity shot. So essentially, it has like matcha in
Okay.
it, has turmeric in it, some ashwagandha like mushrooms in it. It's this like jam packed like
Okay.
productivity shot, and it helps with like stress, focus, all that stuff. And I usually take it with, if I don't take it with my coffee, I'll usually take it with anything like a tea, a caffeinated tea or something like that, and it just elongates that energy and has me
Hmm.
locked in. And to be quite honest, I like
And
that more than I like taking my ADD meds, to be honest. I'm not
really.
even joking. Because on my ADD meds, the crash is so heavy. Like I'm spent at the end of the
Mhm.
day and sometimes irritable. Like I'm not really eating. But this one, it's just a really, really subtle come down. And I'm just really solid for like almost a full day. So I really, really love that. And I mentioned that I'm a partner. I'm partnering with them. I actually have a code for folks. It is highly 20 IGHLY 20. You get 20% off your first purchase or 48% off a subscription for that. I'll drop the link down below. If you go to magicmind.com/highly, you can go ahead and take advantage of that.
Oh, that
Yeah,
sounds
man.
legit.
Um, bro, so let's go ahead, and I want people to get to know you and share a little bit about yourself. So, yeah, any way and how you would say that, go ahead and do that.
What a rant. Okay, let's see. I'm a first generation Brazilian immigrant. Moved here when I was 9, and now I'm a lawyer. I've done everything from business litigation to personal injury litigation. Now I do habitability stuff, so I sue a lot of landlords, things like that. If you want to sue your landlord or you were injured, you can hit me up, RileyAirsoft.com. That's the law firm website. And yeah, I've been interested in politics for a long time. And I think that I also went through like a political journey of, getting here from a country, I'm sure we'll get to this in immigration, but when you come here from a more liberal country like Brazil, I think you're gravitated to the, ideals of America, and you think a certain party may resemble that, like Libertarian or Republican Party. And then the more you learn, your ideas of things
Mm.
change. So I've always been real passionate about people having a voice in politics or people having a voice in life, and how you get that is power. And that's one of the main reasons I was like, I need to go get an education, become a lawyer, get some respect around here. So yeah, and that's kind of like where I get involved in politics and the law. Besides that, like you said, it's a lot of MMA. Been married for 8 years. I got almost all my family still lives in Brazil, so I go back a lot. And it's interesting to have a foot in a lot of different worlds in America because I'm ethically, racially half black. I'm not culturally black American, although I grew up in
Mm.
this space. Obviously, I'm Latino because I'm Brazilian. I speak Spanish, so I'm in that community. So it's interesting getting a flavor and a foot in all of the communities, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm around like kind of the elite in LA and
Mm.
things like that. So I get a complex perspective
Yeah,
on things.
yeah, and which I that's always what not fascinates me, but always makes our conversations more rich because you do have like more of a different perspective than other folks that I communicate with, which I truly appreciate. So that's dope. Thanks so much for sharing all that, bro. But enough about you, enough about me. We're gonna dive into this stuff because
Run
it's a
it.
lot. So y'all, this episode, as I probably mentioned in the pre-show, is all about the election. This is the election special because one, I'm passionate about politics and things like that. and so is Gustavo. So I want to start where we're at in the polls because this is probably going to be one of the most consequential elections that, and Goose, you can say what you want on this too. One of the most consequential elections that we'll have in, damn, I really don't know how long, like legitimately.
Well, I'll tell you this. I think it's the most consequential election we had in a long time, probably in both of our lifetimes, was
Yep,
2016. And the reason for that is because look what's happened to the
yep,
Supreme Court, and look what's happened in a bunch of district courts, and look what's happened to our environmental protections and our food protections. And as people are getting sick and dying from, XYZ outbreaks, remember what Trump did about those protections. The next election, that'll be the most important election of our lifetimes,
yeah,
is this one.
yeah, yeah, and that's how I see it. It is like it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot, like legitimately. So when we look at how the polling is going right now, basically, if you're getting like all of these ads, flyers, text messages, calls, emails, all that, it's because like the election is incredibly close. There's about 20 to 25 different ways that each candidate could win the election based off of these seven swing states. So if you didn't know what the swing states are or don't know what a swing state is, it's basically a toss up state between like either the Republicans or the Democrats can win it, if I could put it at baseline level. Um, the seven swing states that we have right now with VP Harris in the race against Trump is Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. According to 538, which does a ton of polling, reviews polling across the US and across different factors, an organization that does polling on the ground, uh, it has Georgia swinging towards Trump by 2 points. Pennsylvania and Nevada are basically virtually even, literally dead even. Arizona is swinging Trump's way by 2 points. Michigan is going towards VP Harris by 1 point. North Carolina is swinging towards Trump by 1 point. And Wisconsin is swinging towards VP Harris by 1 point. Now, I will say all of these different things, there are basically a, what do you call it? But a,
Margin of
say
error.
again? Margin of
Margin
error.
of
Perfect.
error.
Thank you so much. There's a margin of error. And typically it's around 6 points when you're talking about survey data, because depending on how a question is asked, who is asked, regionally asked, they try and get the best amount that they can and the way that they phrase it, how they phrase it. There's a lot of back end stuff that goes into polling and surveying and all these different things. So this just gives us a general overview of where we're at right now. But based off of that, there's a lot that can happen. Have you seen this polling data? What do you think of the polling data, Gustavo?
So here's the thing, okay? I don't believe this polling data for a second. I really don't. And I'll tell you why. In a lot of these swing states, there's also Senate
Mm,
races going on. And the Senate races, if you look at those numbers, are the margins are wide. You're talking plus 5 to 7 in some of these
mhm.
Senate races. And then when you do a head to head on the presidential, you're getting these numbers. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But the thing about the Senate races is that it's very rare for a voter to split their ticket. Just because of the system that we have, the two-party system that we've had forever, people vote down the line one way or the other until they get to like their very, very local election, who the school board member is, because they know them. Otherwise, they're voting straight Republican or they're voting straight Democrat. There is nobody in those states who's going to be like, okay, I like Donald Trump, but then I'm going to turn around and vote for my very liberal senator. That person doesn't
Mhm.
exist. So if a senator's up by 7, my guarantee is that Harris is going to win that state. So I think Harris is going to run away with every single one of those swing states, maybe besides Arizona. Georgia's going to be close. Everywhere else, it's going to be a blowout. And the other thing is, with the presidential polling, this was my second point. One, Trump has admitted that his campaign is paying pollsters to put
Mm.
out polls. He said this in his Joe Rogan interview, which I don't recommend anybody
It was
subjecting
also
themselves to.
3 hours
Uh,
long.
yeah, it's an exercise in futility if you want to learn anything. But he said, these pollsters charge us a bunch of money and then they'll put out a poll that says 51-49 or whatever. And he said that. And he's like, I don't even know if they call anybody, blah, 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 blah. So the problem with these aggregates that you'll see from websites like the one you're looking at is they don't have a lot of bias towards polling. They'll put in every poll that comes out and then they'll give you an average. Well, if you flood the polling with Trump plus one, or the sample size is overly Republican or overly Gen X, which is voting for Trump for some reason, overly represented in Trump support, you're going to get polling that's much closer than it is. My third point is this: Trump has not gained any support since that 2020 election. There's nobody that was like, man, I love Joe Biden and I love the Democrats. And then Trump went and racked up 34 felonies. Turns out that Russia has been heavily influencing our elections. We all knew that, but there's more proof of that. And the economy is doing better. And we'll get to that in a second. But there's not a bunch of people who thought, oh, okay, well, now I'll vote for Trump. Trump has always been at that 47, 48% of the popular vote, which in 2016 led to him winning because A, Hillary Clinton was such a bad candidate, and B, Jill Stein, who we also know is a Russian asset, decided to show up and steal some votes, and she was successful.
And people didn't go vote.
That's not going to happen.
And people didn't go vote.
Yeah, the turnout wasn't the
same at all. Yeah.
Right. So to me, I just don't think that if the turnout is high, and Trump loses, and the only way Trump can win really is by winning Pennsylvania. He has to win Pennsylvania. If he doesn't win Pennsylvania, he doesn't have a shot. And let me say this final thing about the polling. Keep everything what I just said in mind. Okay. The swing state polling is always less reliable because there's so many polls, and there's so many polls that are manipulated, and there's so many polls that are just garbage. They're F-rated polls, and they get put into an algorithm that spits out an average. Polling that's reliable is polling in states that aren't competitive, because there's like one or two quality polls that come out of there, and that's it. If you saw a poll recently that came out of Kansas, obviously deep red state, Trump won it, I think, by 10 in 2020. He's up by 5. That means his lead was cut in half. Now, what that tells me is that there's a lot of Republicans who see what's happening and go, hey, I can't support this anymore. This is beyond me. Not only is this not the Republican Party anymore, and we can talk about that when we get to the economy, but I can't support what he's doing, what he's saying, and how he tried to overthrow the election. And you've seen that with Dick Cheney's endorsement. You've seen that with a bunch of Republicans endorsing Kamala Harris. So I just don't see it. It's not going to happen.
See, now this is where we split. Actually, I agree with the first point. I think you have like a overall around the polling. Like, I don't trust polling, especially since 2016, right? They had Hillary running away with it, which I think put people in a lackadaisical state, and they did not turn out. Yeah. Like, voter turnout just did not happen in 2016. What I would say is that I'm not convinced by the American people. That's just it. Like, I'm just not convinced. Like, I think when we look at particularly in, what was it, 2022, right? Was Stacey Abrams 2022, or is that 2020, right? Where that was a split ticket. That's how we got 2 Democrats in the Senate, and then a Republican governor, which Brian Kemp is.
Yeah, but 2022, I mean, they also had, and that Republican governor wasn't, if I'm remembering correctly, he's not like an insane person. And remember, 2022, you also had a blue wave, and Democrats outperformed the polls by a lot. Just like Trump outperformed the polls in 2016, Democrats overperformed in 2022. So I think not only is that same thing going to happen, I think it's going to be a wider margin of victory than anybody. Well, only Biden is beating Trump, but it's going to be even the popular vote. Biden beat him, by a lot in the Electoral College. He also beat him by 4.5% of the popular vote. I think it's going to be even more, because I just don't see how, if you're an undecided voter, this is your first time voting. There's nobody who's an undecided voter who this is their first time voting for Donald Trump. There may be some Gen Zers who are voting for Donald Trump because of his like raw masculinity type of thing. But there's nobody who voted for a Democrat before and now is convinced to vote for Donald Trump. That person just doesn't exist. There may be new voters for Donald Trump, but there's also a bunch of new voters for Democrats. As people turn 18, right, they're new voters. They may be voting for Donald Trump for the first time, but that person's 1 in 10 from that demographic of who's going to vote for a Democrat. So he's not going to gain votes. If people turn out, especially in the swing states, there's just not a path for him. If he's losing Republicans and he's not gaining young people, and now he's losing Latinos, which he had a lead in Latinos for somehow, sheep's voting for wolves, but that's okay. He lost that with the whole Puerto Rican joke situation, and he's lost his lead. I mean, he didn't have a lead, but he was doing historically well with young black men, which again,
It's
insane. Pigs voting for bacon, and now Obama came out and scorned everybody for that, and now his points has fallen. He's down to like 36% or 37% with young black men, which is great. So I just don't see a path for him.
I mean, I'm just not convinced, bro. Like, it's this. We had a very similar conversation in 2016 because you were like, "How does this dude win? Like, how does this dude win? Like, it's gonna be a landslide," and it didn't happen. I understand. We talked about it at length as to how that happened. Hillary was just a not.
That was literally the first thing I was about to say.
She was a terrible candidate.
We put up the worst candidate. If you ran Joe Biden in 2016, that landslide he wins by such a crazy margin. Does. 2016 Biden would have smashed him. We would have never been in this position.
Yeah. Okay, so you actually said something that I wasn't going to talk about, but like since you brought it up, I do want to talk about, because that is one of the things that any poli-sci like undergraduate student learns, right? That Democrats will win every single election if voter turnout is there. Like, all we got to do is show up and vote.
That's
right?
true.
Or, I'm not a Democrat, but all you got to do is show up and vote. Like, voter turnout, it's always going to lean Democrat. In comes electoral college, right? Which is this lopsided, weird thing that a lot of people don't understand.
It's DEI for Republicans, as people have been saying recently.
That's such a good point. So
DEI for the white
I just want
people.
to ask a real quick question, and we could probably talk about it together. But why is the popular vote not enough?
I mean, well, think about it this way. In the last, I want to say, and I don't have these numbers off the top of my head, but in the last 30 years, I think Republicans have only won the popular vote twice.
No, you're right. That's right. It's like last 40 years.
And their argument is, well, if we don't have the electoral college, then minority states, or not minority, but small states won't be represented. They'll be bullied by the coasts, right? Because most people live in cities, and most people live in LA, New York, Texas, not Dallas, Dallas, Houston, big cities. So you can win the popular vote all you want. And Republicans have mastered leveraging the electoral college to focus on a few states. The ironic part of the electoral college, I'm obviously, as you may be able to tell from my tone, I'm very anti-electoral college immediately. But what's funny about it is that the whole point of it is so that everyone is represented. But what ends up happening is my vote counts, a third or even less than the vote of someone in Pennsylvania. And the election, and think about how you started this conversation. The first thing you said was there are 7 swing states, and then you named them. We're in California. Our state doesn't matter, right? Since Reagan, we haven't gone Republican, so it just doesn't really matter. So it's done the opposite. Now what it does is it focuses on small states, swing states. Those are the only states that matter in the election. Those are the only states that people actually go to and talk to, and it makes it so the majority of the country doesn't get to choose the president. It's this weird strategic game now where you have to invest in certain states and they get way more power than everybody else, despite the fact that California is the 4th largest economy or 5th largest economy in the world. And we supply all these red states with all of the federal aid. We give way more to the federal government than they do. Our vote here, even though we're one of the highest tax-paying states in the country, if not the highest, doesn't count as much as a swing state. So to me, it's absurd. It just doesn't make any sense. And it allows people like Donald Trump to lose the popular vote by 4.5%, which is millions and millions and millions of votes, and still become president.
Yep.
What I hope happens, and I really do hope this, even though I've bet some money the other way, I really pray for this. I hope that Harris wins the Electoral College and then loses the popular vote by like 20 million, just something insane.
That would never happen, but yeah.
And then Republicans they would
Yeah.
lose their mind and they would say, "This is so un-American. This is so undemocratic." And I would say, "Oh my God, you guys are so right. We should get rid of the Electoral College. Do it."
That
That
would
would be
absolutely be
amazing,
amazing.
but it won't
But
happen.
no, and that's, I mean, you said everything that I would have said. I actually wrote it down because I heard this and I was like, I got to get it more specifically. The last time that a Republican won the popular vote was in 2004, so 20 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, and then the time before that was 1988, George H.W. Bush. But you're absolutely right. So when we think about the Electoral College, it's like incredibly frustrating.
It's DEI for farmers, and it's just to, and here's what's crazy. Yeah, it just
Yeah,
drives me nuts. It drives me nuts because how do we have, and they always say, well, it's not a democracy, it's a representative, blah blah blah, it's a republic. That is a type of
yeah,
democracy, my friend. Take a civics class. I'm
begging.
begging you. Okay, you can't have a place where you're losing the popular vote every single time, yet the president is based on 7 states. And if sometimes they change a little bit. Sometimes like Georgia, like we start with Georgia's purple, Georgia
Yeah.
used to not be. So things change slightly over time, but it's yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
absurd.
And then if folks want to learn a little bit more about the Electoral College or even like different options, there's actually a cool podcast that Stacey Abrams has started. It's called Assembly Required. She has a whole episode dedicated on that. I'll drop it in the link below or in the description so y'all can have that. But it was a really good episode and they talk about like ranked voting, ranked choice, really good stuff that we're not going to dive into here. All right, so let's switch it up. Let's get into some topics here. So what I wanted to do originally was I wanted to talk about like top 3, top 5 different things that are like most pressing to voters, like across the board. Now, what is interesting, but Republicans and Democrats, they each have their top 5 most important top issues are drastically different from each other, except for the economy. And this information I pulled from a 2024 Gallup poll that just dropped, I think like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. But this has the most up to date information about what is like most crucial, what's pressing for voters. So what I decided to do was I wanted to talk about the economy because that's the number one thing that people keep bringing up. So we're going to talk about the economy and compare VP Harris to Trump on that. Then we're going to talk about immigration because that's important. That's the second most important issue to Republicans right after the economy. And then we're going to talk about democracy in the U.S. Because that's the second most important issue for Democrats after the economy. So, according to Gallup, voters, regardless of party, rated the economy as extremely important influence on their vote for president, and that's the highest it's been since 2008 during the Great Recession, which was around 55%, right? So that tells us right now, right off the bat, that obviously like the economy is incredibly important. We're looking at inflation that like we're feeling it. Inflation is higher, gas prices are higher, so on and so forth. We're going to get into it a lot more about, debunking some things. But what do you think about that right off the top as far as like the 3 topics?
Boy, do I have a lot to say about this. First of all, okay, let me. I feel like I'm talking like I work. Obviously, this is a weekday, so I worked this morning. So I feel like I talk like a lawyer a lot when I work that day. So I don't want to go. So first point, and then I go through all my points. But let me say this off the top: Americans have a delusion that has been maybe the greatest marketing scheme by Republicans ever, and that delusion is that Republicans are better at the economy. That is false. And you can look at any metric for this, any metric, job creation, wages, uh, literally the stocks, Dow Jones, stock market, any metric you want to look at, you can look at. And the bottom line you'll find is that every single time Democrats improve the economy, Democrats increase the number of jobs, the rate of increase is higher, the GDP is higher, Republicans take over, and Republicans always promise the same thing. They say, we're going to cut taxes, we're going to cut costs, we're going to cut red tape, and the economy is going to be great. What they do is they come in, they cut taxes for the rich, they do nothing for the middle class, and here's the important part: they don't cut spending. So if you look at the deficits in government, they're always higher under Republicans because they've cut taxes, and they did not do any sort of corresponding cuts. Okay, so that's the big picture thing. And by the way, Bill Clinton said something interesting when he was at the DNC. He said, we're 50 to 1. 50 million jobs created by Democrats since his presidency. I'm not sure what the time period on that was, to 1 million. Granted, COVID is in there, and I understand that, and that's my next point. But 50 to 1, because Republicans don't focus on the middle class. They focus on trickle-down economics, which has been debunked 100 ways from Sunday by everybody and their grandmother. So Republicans come in thinking, let's cut taxes for the rich and it'll trickle down to you. And what they mean is they're going to piss on your face while they make all the money. Yeah. That's all that means. Secondly, if you look at what's happened with COVID, and this is where I'll get to, more specifically Harris and Donald Trump. Donald Trump inherited one of the best economies we've ever had from Barack Obama. Okay, stocks all-time high, job creation through the roof. And remember, from my first point, who did Barack Obama take over from? Barack Obama took over one of the worst economies ever. He took over in 2008. The country's falling apart. Everyone's concerned about the economy. Everything is shit. So what does he do? He invests in jobs. He invests in Americans. He raised the country from the dead. And the economy was booming. Gets it handed over to Trump. Trump does okay, mostly because he doesn't do much. Like, think of the legislation he's passed. Think of the things he actually did. And remember that for 2 years, Donald Trump had the House and the Senate. Name a legislation that he passed that did anything for anybody. You can't. What he did do is he cut a bunch of red tape, right? Which has led to a bunch of other problems. Now, look at what look what Joe Biden inherits. He inherits a country that's falling apart again. Why? Because Donald Trump had a whole playbook on how to deal with the pandemic, and he threw it out the window. Barack Obama said, hey, if there's a pandemic, here's a playbook. We put a bunch of money into it. Donald Trump decided not to use it, right? And what did he do? He cut taxes for the rich. He did a temporary tax cut for the middle class, which expired, right? So people were saying, oh, my taxes went up, blah, 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 blah. That's because they expired. The taxes for the rich and the corporations, that never expires. That never sunsets. You'd have to pass a new bill, okay? So keep that in mind. Now you have Joe Biden. What does Joe Biden do? Joe Biden shows up. Joe Biden passes the CHIPS Act, and he passes the Inflation Reduction Act. And guess what those things did? They manufacturing jobs through the roof. We've never had more manufacturing jobs. He's drill, baby, drill. That's Joe Biden's whole thing. We've never had higher energy production in this country, ever. Jobs are through the roof. Unemployment is almost to the same rate it was before the pandemic. It's averaged at 4.2%. Right? So Joe Biden comes in, makes an investment in infrastructure, makes an investment in manufacturing, makes an investment in technology. And by the way, he's added less to the deficit than Donald Trump did. And now the economy is the envy of the world. The GDP's never been higher. Okay. Stocks have never been higher. And now we're getting all these benefits, right? And we're kind of on the cusp of being back from the pandemic. Everyone said there was going to be a recession. There wasn't. Everyone said we were going to be screwed. We weren't. We had very high inflation, and that's what everyone's so concerned about. They go to the grocery store, things are much more expensive. That's true. And that's also true for every effing country on the whole planet. I'm so tired of people being like, man, the inflation and the Democrats and blah, 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 blah. It's called a pandemic. It's not called an epidemic. It's not just here. It was the entire world. And we recovered better than any G7 country in the world. What that means is we recovered better than any first world major country, major economy on the planet. We came back the fastest. And now we're on top of the world again. So to me, when people say Donald Trump I trust him more on the economy, or I'm concerned about, the Democrats' handling of the economy. And sorry, that's a long rant, but my last point on this is listen to Donald Trump's plan for the economy. Okay. And A, tell me if you would ever imagine a Republican saying any of this. And B, tell me if this makes any sense to you. Okay. So I want to impose tariffs on everything. And literally that's how he's proposed to pay for everything. There was a question someone asked him. They said, hey, Donald Trump, how would we pay for childcare? His answer was tariffs. Now, if you don't know what a tariff is, all right, Reggie, go ahead and clip this. Hey guys, so real quick, a tariff.
Well, now you got to finish it now.
No, but I am. So a tariff is a fine, okay, for importing goods. So let's say you wanted to import Chinese cars, and we actually. So I will say this: tariffs aren't all bad. Right now, we have strategic tariffs on electric vehicles. So if a Chinese importer wants to import Chinese-made EVs, there is 100% tariff on that. That means the price of the car is doubled for whatever they would pay for it to come in. And why do we do that? Because EVs in China are subsidized. So in China, not only do they have labor laws that would shame the devil, but they can make them for dirt cheap. They can sell them for dirt cheap. It would put us all out of business. So they put tariffs on that so that we have our own EV production, which is important. Tariffs on everything would just be passed on to you. So, for example, let's say if anybody know Derek, the menswear guy on Twitter, he did a great thread on this. He was talking about suits, and he said, "Well, if the material is 300, right, and someone buys $300 worth of materials, they get it from Italy, let's say, and they make the suit here, and they sell it to you for 1,000, right, because that's their margin. If they have to pay a tariff on that of 50%, let's say, I mean, Donald Trump has said numbers as high as 2,000%. Let's say it was 50%. Well, now they're paying $450 for the same material. Well, guess what? Your suit just went up $150. That's how a tariff works. It doesn't, the way he explains it, if you don't know anything about tariffs, it would make it sound like Italy pays for that. It would make it sound like Italy pays you so that you buy something from them and then you charge them a tariff and they pay you to send it to you. That's not how they work. It's not like a fine for selling things. It's a fine to the buyer of things, and that buyer is the person that's going to sell it to you.
Yeah. And
If
what's
that makes
easy and
sense.
what's easier,
So
moving their whole manufacturing infrastructure from wherever country that it's in, or to
exactly.
have a consumer pay for it? There, what are we
Yeah,
talking about here?
and that's the point of tariffs, right? The point of tariffs is like, well, we'll force them back, or and we'll make American manufacturing more competitive. All that they'll never force anybody back. They're almost never successful. One, and two, what it does is it just raises the market for everything. So now you step into Walmart to buy a T-shirt, and the T-shirt made in China is the same price as the T-shirt made in the USA, or maybe it's even a little cheaper. And what do?
You
You
still
still
buy it.
buy the
Yeah.
cheaper one. So you haven't bought American. Everything has just raised in price. I mean, the steel tariffs, actually, not even this. Yeah, the steel tariffs. If you think about what happened there, so we put tariffs on steel. And by the way, this is the other thing about tariffs that happens all the time. They start trade wars. The second you put a tariff on something, it pisses off that country because you've made their products more expensive. Not that they're paying for it, but they're going to sell less of it. Now they put a tariff
Yep.
on your goods. And if you remember, Donald Trump said, "Oh, all the farmers did great under me." Farmers were
Decimated.
decimated under Donald Trump because soybean farmers couldn't sell soy because tariffs destroyed them. And we had to give huge bailouts to these farmers because they were screwed. And the federal government had to step in and give them a bunch of money. And by the way, reparations and support and welfare is fine when you're a farmer. It's not okay if you're black. But that's a different story for a
Oh, I
different
did a
day.
story on that a few months ago. There was yeah,
Oh,
there
there we
was something
go.
that dropped that was like two. Can't remember the specific number, but black farmers did get some. They got some form of reparations. But anyways, keep going. Yeah.
Good. But yeah, so my point is Donald Trump's economic plan relying on tariffs is insane. It makes no sense. Second of all, his plan of mass deportation, and we'll get to immigration, that kind of ties us into immigration for a second. But all I'll say about that is think about who the workforce is in a lot of these farms. If you think your food is going to get cheaper by imposing tariffs and then deporting the entire workforce, you're delusional. You have no idea how anything works. And you compare that to Harris's plan. She has an anti-price gouging law, which a lot of people keen said, "Oh my God, that's price control. That's price control." Well, 34 states already have that, and a bunch of companies have already admitted, by way of lowering their prices, that they were price
They
gouging during the
literally
pandemic.
admitted it.
They saw an
Yep.
opportunity, and then they said, "Hey, our prices are too high. Let's lower them because people aren't shopping with us anymore." If they can lower their prices and by quite a bit and be fine, that means their margins were huge, and that means they're price
Yep.
gouging. So I don't see how anybody supports Donald Trump's plan, and we'll talk about what's the worst that could happen. But on the economy, here's the worst that could happen. It could crash the entire economy, put us into the worst recession we've ever seen.
And that's
That's
what
what would
experts
happen
are saying.
when you put mass
That's
deportations and
literally what
tariffs.
experts are saying. There's 16 Nobel Prize winning economists are saying that his economic plan, quote unquote, would decimate the U.S. economy. It'd be
Yeah, it would be
terrible. It would be
screwed.
horrible for everybody. So more specifically, like this is what Trump really stands for. And thanks, Goose, for laying that out because that was like really good stuff. So we got tax cuts and deregulation. That's what Trump wants to do. You already covered the tariffs and trade policies, which he still wants to continue this pointless. I don't know if it's pointless. I'm not going to go as far as to say pointless trade war with China, but like this trade war with China that he says he won it, he didn't win it. He has like some form of energy policy about pushing fossil fuels again, spending cuts again, which would basically get rid of social safety nets. He wants to get rid of the FBI. He literally said he's going to dismantle the Department of Education. Let's see, focus on working class. He says that's what he wants to do. And then healthcare cost reduction. So basically, he's going to try and deregulate healthcare and go privatize healthcare again. So try it. But he tried 4 times and lost every single time.
And by the way, these all of these policies, if they did a blind test on all these policies, all of Trump's policies were less popular than Harris's
Yeah.
policies. When people didn't know who was proposing the policy, Harris's policies were always more popular. It's a cult of personality now, and people just aren't thinking anymore about what's really going to happen if you're doing mass deportations and you're putting a tariff on everything. And then, we can touch on healthcare for a second because his healthcare plan is let's get rid of Obamacare, let's get rid of the ACA. Well, if you get rid of the ACA, and Harris, thank God, has been talking about this, is you go back to when pre-existing conditions impeded you from getting healthcare. That means if your mother is sick, she won't be able to get healthcare. They'll deny her. It puts all the power in the insurance company's hands. And because a lot of people don't have a public option, you're just screwed.
People will die.
You're in the richest country in the world, and you're going to die for lack of health care, which should be a human right at this point. At this point in history, listen, I'm a very, I'm a Democrat. I'm a neoliberal. I love where Harris is right now. She's like just left of center, really. I'm really big on free markets. I'm really big on social safety nets. And to me, and I wouldn't say this in almost any other point in history, but it's crazy to me that you live in the richest country ever of all time. Like our citizens have the highest quality of living of any people ever in the world at any point in time. You can take somebody who's lower middle class in the United States, they live better than people who are upper middle class in almost any other country. They have their own car, they have TV, they can take a vacation. They're doing great. Somehow, outside of all of this money and all of this GDP and all of this shit that we have, we can't guarantee healthcare for people. And by the way, healthcare, a public option is cheaper because people who don't have healthcare, they just go to the emergency room. You still get that bill. Preventative care is cheaper. Universal healthcare is cheaper. But we as a country are so against helping people who don't look like us. Well, I should be saying the white people are so against not helping people who don't look like them. They could never do it. But if we were Denmark, which has that, it would be done. If everybody was white, it would be done. If we were homogenous, it would have been done a long time ago because it makes sense ethically, morally, and financially.
We could talk at length about that, so I'm not going to dive too deep into that. So,
It's getting me fired up on healthcare.
Legitimately, like this is it really does baffle me.
It doesn't make any sense. And what's funny is, it's not like medical professionals are benefiting that much. Obviously, doctors make a lot of money, but who makes a lot of money is
it's
insurance
company. 100%. So to be fair, I also want to mention VP Harris's economic platform. So we got expanding social safety nets. So she supports expanding social safety programs, including healthcare coverage, and has been vocal about promoting affordable housing, paid family leave, accessible childcare, also abortion, green economy investment. So she's aligned herself with some initiatives to combat climate change, advocating for investment in clean energy jobs, electrification of transportation grid and climate resilient infrastructure, taxing the wealthy and the corporate America. Harris supports a tax increase on the wealthy and large corporations, boosting workforce development, for high tech sector and renewable energy, healthcare, tech, so on and so forth. And then affordable healthcare, reducing healthcare costs through government interventions and supported initiatives like capping prescription drug prices, which I've covered in a separate segment. There was already an act that was passed that's going to cover significantly more over the next 10 years. And then investing in small businesses and minority owned businesses, particularly, called the opportunity economy. And yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I
how do
you
you fight
can't.
that? Tell me one thing in
You
there that you
can't.
don't like. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a candidate in my entire life where I was like, yeah, dude, I do all those things. Literally do all those
Yes,
things,
and I
please. That'd be
actually, and I
awesome.
didn't even mention the first time homeowner, like
Yeah,
$25,000, and that would actually increase for
yeah.
first generation home buyers too.
And the other thing that she's proposed more recently is she was talking about the sandwich generation of people who have taken care of their parents,
Yes.
plus they're dealing with student loans,
Yep.
can't buy a
Yep.
house, etc. And she was trying to include in-home care as part of
Oh yes,
healthcare,
absolutely. That's huge.
which would which is huge for people. And here's the problem with Republicans is Republicans only think about issues that affect them directly. I don't have anybody that I have to take care of. My mom is super young and in great health. But I could imagine how much of a burden it is for somebody to have to be an in-home caretaker for their parents and not be supported in any way. And now they're spending money for healthcare and they're spending their time being a caretaker. VP Harris sees a problem like that and she's addressing it. These are real plans for real American people. A plan is not let's deport every single migrant
Mm,
in the country. That's not a plan.
yeah.
You know what I mean? These are the nitty gritty kind of actions that improve everyday lives in ways that really stack up and you'll notice it in your day to day because the president is not supposed to affect you as much as Donald Trump affects us. But the presidency, the federal government, is not supposed to have this much effect on your life. It's really supposed to be
Yeah.
your local
Absolutely.
government. But these are policies that you'll see day in and day out, everyday
Absolutely.
Americans.
And I want to actually give a ton of space for immigration because you said beforehand that you wanted to really like touch on that. But I think that that's one of the things that, like, as we are entering into this weird, interesting era of politics that I'm like experiencing, is that somebody so far off, right? That like has a ton of power, but realistically, when we think about the three branches of government, don't shouldn't to your point shouldn't have this much impact and
Right.
influence on our daily lives, right? It is our city councils. It is actually our state legislatures have a ton of power,
The most
so much
important.
power over our lives and impact our lives, right? But the way that we are approaching politics and the emphasis that is on the presidential race, it's really wild and has completely shattered what I learned in my undergraduate and is like literally I have no like everything
Yeah,
I don't throw the books out. I
it's
just
funny.
have to like reimagine how politics are going to move forward after
Yeah.
this. We're going to talk about this later on, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's just yeah, you just said that and yeah, man, I'm like flabbergasted. Like I'm constantly like, do y'all not realize he just said he would use the
The military
military
against
to
civilians.
go after the
Yeah.
quote unquote radical left. He said that,
Yeah.
and people are making
I don't know how
excuses.
that. Yeah, I don't know, dude. I don't know. I mean, I guess you know what this does though to me is it makes history more. It's weird to say realistic about history because it's something that
Yeah,
happened, but it makes history more realistic in the sense that I could. It's not something that happened a long time ago that could never happen again. And of course, I'm talking about Nazi
dog.
Germany. Like you look at you read the book and you're like, how could this happen? Like how could you let Hitler come to power and start mass murdering people and support him? And now I got people who are like, you know what? Maybe America does need a dictator. Yeah, dictator on day one, that's okay. Why do we have term limits? I don't care. Who cares if Russia's interfering in the election? Who cares if he's saying he wants to use the military? These people are enemies of the
It's
state, anyways.
sarcasm.
They're
It's
our enemies. They're
hyperbole.
against us.
What
He's
are we
joking,
talking
and then he
about?
does it. And he's like, "Well, maybe we need it. We need it to do that." And it's just like, yo, for the Republican Party, a party who's always been, Constitution, our rights, small government, blah 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 blah. You're advocating for the biggest government in this election. The Democratic platform is not as big of a government as a fascist government. It's hard to get bigger than a fascist government. Donald Trump wants control of everything about your life, and that's what you're voting for. And people don't think about these things because maybe it's not real to them, or maybe they can't contextualize it. I don't know what it is, but this language, and I mean, you have his own generals coming out and saying, yeah, this guy's a fascist. Like, this is fascism 100%. And people are just like, oh, come on, that can't be right. That's not true. You guys just don't like Donald Trump. It's like, what? It's
Yeah, like
crazy.
I don't think it comes down to like, and I had a conversation with somebody, and I legitimately think that this dude, and Reggie knows who he is. I call him MAGA boy because we're playing basketball. I play basketball on Wednesday nights, Saturday mornings, and this guy shows up every now and again. And I truly believe that this dude is a canvasser for for Trump. I truly believe it because one day randomly he just like he's like, hey, so you're still voting for Kamala? Because I called him out on wearing a shirt that was mad disrespectful to the vice president of the United
Yes, I
States,
remember you told
bro.
me about
This
this.
dude was wearing
Yeah.
a shirt that said, and I quote, uh, "Joe and the hoe gotta go." And I said, bro, calling the vice president of the United States a hoe is fucking
Sheesh.
wild, right? And he is
Crazy.
like, well, this rumor about her sleeping with. I said, bro, first of all, it's a rumor.
That's
Second of all,
wild.
who the fuck are you? You know what I'm saying? Like
That's
that's the vice president of the United States, and we're talking about a man who literally said, and excuse the French if you're listening with kids in the car, cut now. He said, "I grabbed them by the pussy." That's what he said.
and they let you do it when you're a
He's talking about
star.
sexual assault, recorded sexual assault.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
What are we talking about?
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't even know, dude. I don't get me. Don't make me talk about what people consider in the election, because
Yeah,
it doesn't
sorry.
even make
And I
sense to
told
me
Reg
anymore.
I was playing for when we were playing for this episode, I did not want to start like just going into like just the bashing part. But like I think as one people who study politics, like literally study politics in our undergrad, and then like nerd out
I
about
don't
it
know,
and
dude.
are obsessed with it post. This breaks
I
it
just don't.
breaks it breaks my
I don't know.
brain. Like I literally it breaks my brain. I don't know what to
I
do.
don't know.
Anyways, okay. So we're gonna skip the last
Yeah, just
topic.
let's keep
Yeah,
going. Let's
let's
keep
go
going.
skip the last topic, but I really want to like spend some time talking about immigration in particular. So really quickly before I do a clear out for you because you wanted some extra time on this. So this is what this is in a high level view what Trump has said around immigration, right? So strengthening border security. He wants to complete this border wall that he started that only has about somewhere between 3 and 5% that he got built during his presidency. He wants expedited deportations. He wants to send mass deportations. He wants to deport as many people, millions and millions and millions of people, right off top, and reinstitute the Remain in Mexico policy and birthright citizenship. And he's also called them birth tourism and anchor babies. That's what he called birthright citizenship. Then he wants to end merit-based immigration. Trump has expressed a desire to reform the immigration system to favor merit-based. Did I say end merit-based immigration? Not end it. He wants to reform the merit-based immigration process for prioritizing highly skilled individuals who meet US labor market demands, and then limit family-based immigration. And then finally, he wants to reduce legal immigration and focusing mostly on curbing illegal immigration, putting caps on family sponsored visas, reducing refugees quotas, so on and so forth. Which I will say, by the merit based immigration, it is very, very hard to get your citizenship based off of merit unless you come from a white country and you have money. Let's just keep it real.
This is going to be the first
Yeah,
thing I
go
say
ahead.
about this.
This is your clear out. This
On
is
the
your clear out.
statue on the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It does not say, "Give me your smartest, your most hardworking, your most successful people from your country." That is un-American. This whole merit-based system. We have a merit-based system. It's great. That's fine. If you're given priority, that's great. But that's not the point of this country. That's never been the point of this country. The point of this country is that you can come here, anybody can come here, and they have opportunity. That's what the government is made for. The government is made for things that the capitalistic market can't provide, and to make sure that people have an opportunity if they can work hard, if they can do it, they can make it. And that's always been our goal. Upward mobility in this country is like 30th in the world. We're not the number one for upward mobility. We are a place where if you come here and you work hard, you can become somebody. This whole merit based system to me, ending what he wants to do is basically make it the only way to get into the country. Essentially, is nuts. It's un-American. It's crazy. Other thing, ending birthright citizenship is literally insane. That is legitimately the
It's
craziest
nuts.
idea I've
That's
ever
nuts to
heard.
me.
It's against the
Yeah.
Constitution, for one. You'd have to amend the Constitution. Second of all, it's the most un American shit I've ever heard in my life. But what I wanted to talk about in immigration, outside just the craziest ideas, two things about immigration. One, if you are somebody, and I guess I made a lot of these points for uneducated, in my mind, a lot of like uneducated, low information voters, but also people who are very pro free markets, because I'm very pro free markets. Here's the thing about immigration that people may not understand about, especially in this country, or specifically in this country. One, we have a very schizophrenic relationship with immigration. We have been bringing immigrants to do our jobs here forever. It was the Italians, it was the Irish, it was the Chinese, it's the
Black people too,
Mexicans.
you know.
That's how it's always been. You had the Bracero program where you were letting in as many Mexicans as would come to do our work during the World War, and then you send them back. And then when you need them during Vietnam, you ask them to come back. And it's always been this way. Okay. Second of all, remember that undocumented migrants do a lot of the work that Americans simply aren't willing to do. And how do we know this? Well, during the Trump presidency, where he stopped a lot of immigration
Farmers
into the
again were
country,
hurting.
you and deported
Yeah.
some people, you had stuff rotting on
Yep.
the
Farmers were
fields
hurting.
because they couldn't find
Yeah.
somebody. Farmers couldn't find people to do it because as much as you'll stomp your feet and say migrants are taking all my jobs, they're not coming and becoming engineers most of the time. They're coming and doing the shit that you don't want to do, and they're willing to do it for a better life. Second of all, they commit crimes at a lower rate than natural
That is
born
an
citizens.
absolute
Now, I
fact.
want you to really think about what I just said. Illegal immigrants, they get here, they commit crime at a lower clip than natural born Americans. Okay? Just really understand that. People aren't coming here to commit crimes. They're coming here to work hard, get a better life. Most of the time they keep their head down. They don't even report problems because they're so scared, and they just work to try to earn money for their family. Third of all, because so many illegal immigrants get a fake social security number, they are paying taxes. And you can look this up anywhere by any organization. Immigrants paid $10 billion in taxes in 2022. 10 billion with a B. And that's sales taxes, that's excise taxes, that's social security they'll never get. They will never get social security. That's into healthcare that they cannot get either unless they're in California or somewhere else that has a brain. So these people come here, okay? They're working, they're paying taxes. It comes out to about 9,000 per immigrant. Okay. They're floating our social security system. They're keeping it afloat because it's getting used up way more than we pay into it. And we got these people helping us. And finally, outside of all those things, okay, outside of the fact that we've been asking them to come, outside of the fact that we need them, outside of the fact that they commit less crimes, outside of the fact that they pay a bunch of taxes, you know what's hilarious? An illegal immigrant probably has a higher effective tax rate than most millionaires. Let me say that to you again. An illegal immigrant in this country probably has a higher effective tax rate than millionaires, meaning he pays a higher percentage of his wage, probably 35 to 40%, compared to a millionaire who, on average, has a 12 or 10% effective tax rate. Look that up. Okay. Outside of all of those things, okay, let's say you don't give a shit about any of what I just said. Let's say you're a pure capitalist American, red blooded American, and God damn it, do you love this country? And you don't care about any of that. Immigrants come here and they work for rock bottom wages. They do skilled labor. Don't call it unskilled labor because they're building your houses and they're cooking your food and they're doing all kinds of stuff that you can't just do yourself because you don't know how. They're doing that at rock bottom prices. which is why people complain, right? They're taking all of our jobs, blah, 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 blah. Do you know the cost of labor, how high it would go if all of a sudden you had to hire Chad to cut your grass? Chad doesn't charge 50 bucks. Chad needs at least 200. And now all of the farmers, their cost goes up. All of the home building, all of those costs go up. So to me, and now this is the solution to these problems, what you do is very simple. You take people who are here legally or illegally, you take people who are illegally, you give them all social security numbers immediately. You go, here we go, here's an ID, here's a social security number, start paying your taxes. You can enroll your kids in school without feeling like you're going to get deported. You can call the police without feeling like you're going to get deported. And you can get benefits because you're a tax paying, you give them all green cards. Very easy. In 10 years or 8 years or whatever you want, they become citizens. Easy peasy. They're paying taxes. They commit less crimes than people living here. They work for less money. To me, it literally doesn't, from any angle, it doesn't make
Yep.
sense. My point is, if you're an American, you should be thanking God that Mexicans decide to come to this country, and you should be happy anytime you see one. Because if you didn't have them, everything would cost a ton, and this country would collapse because we don't like to do our own work. Americans don't like to make anything. We don't manufacture anything. We're a service-based economy. So when you talk about mass deportations, it's literally the most xenophobic, racist idea because it's not grounded in any sort of logic from any point of view. There's no point of view where it makes any sense. Last thing I'll say is look at what's happened in Ohio. So you have
Oh
Haitian
my God,
immigrants
Springfield.
that got put in
Yeah.
Ohio, and they're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs, they're eating the pets of the people who live there. And what did the people who actually live there say? They said, we love these immigrants. They come here, they work hard, they filled up our churches, our population was in decline no longer. We had a bunch of manufacturing jobs open, they filled all of them. They're way better than the workers we have. The guy actually said that. And that's America. America is a place where you can come, and if you decide to work hard, you can be successful. That's the country that I want to build.
They also increased. I saw a clip, and maybe I'll find it and put it in here. But this woman was at a city council meeting, and she was speaking. She was like, "Man, it's a daggone shame that these Haitian immigrants came here
I
because
love that video.
they
Yes.
came and took these manufacturing jobs and then bought all these dilapidated, boarded up homes, fixed them up, increased home values. People actually want to live here now and move here. They started businesses here, paying taxes.
It's just
Yeah,
racism. It's just
it
racism.
literally is racist.
It's
Yeah,
racism and it's a lack of education of how the economy actually
yeah,
works. And I will say this, my fault, especially when I was younger, and by younger I mean like 2 years ago, younger, is that I thought if you told people this and then you actually showed them the studies and you showed them the numbers, people would be convinced. And 95% of them just aren't. It's a
yeah.
belief. It's just I have to be better than these people and I don't give a shit what it takes. I got to believe whatever I got to
Mm.
believe. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, I used to run my own political podcast. None of what I've said is my opinion. My opinion, like, oh, I like sushi better than burgers, that's an opinion. What I've said here about the numbers on immigration, the numbers on crime, the numbers on what they bring to the economy, like the taxes that they pay, you can look this up. I beg you, go Google this stuff and say, do immigrants pay taxes? And you'll see the $10 billion number I'm talking about. Don't take my word for it. Who the hell am I? Do your own research on this and you'll see what I'm talking
Yep,
about.
exactly. To keep it moving, I want to be fair and say the other side of this for Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris says that she wants to create a pathway of citizenship. So Harris has advocated for creating pathways of citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants, including dreamers, temporary protected status, and essential workers. And this aligns with a broader Biden plan that would create, to your point, Goose, that you said earlier, like an 8-year pathway to citizenship for the undocumented population. Modernizing border security, asylum and refugee reforms. Harris supported a rebuilding of asylum process to make it faster and fairer, arguing for humane treatment of asylum seekers. And another point on this asylum seekers and refugee reforms, remember who started the separation of children from their parents policy, right? To as a deterrent. He said, I'm going to separate kids as a
Yeah,
deterrent and then put them in cages.
as a deterrent. That's
And
tough.
put them in cages, literal cages.
That's tough.
And then kids died.
Yeah.
I
That
yeah.
The other thing that I will say about Harris's immigration policies are that they put forth a plan, a bill that was widely supported by Republicans. I know everyone's heard about this a million times, but it's worth saying one more time that this was a bill, bipartisan bill, supported by some of the most conservative members of Congress, and Donald Trump killed it so that he could stand on stage and say, the migrants are flooding our country, which is also not true. I mean, a million Republicans came out and said, yes, Donald Trump made a phone call and killed this bill. And yeah, I mean, that's not up for debate. So anybody who cares about border patrol and border security, Trump doesn't care. He wants to run on the issue. He doesn't want to solve an issue.
Like, we've been talking for a minute, and some of this was we stayed on track as much as possible, but I knew we were going to derail. I absolutely knew it, so it's totally fine. That's what we do. But I want to give a little bit of time because I think we have to be prepared, right? Like, I think I mentioned, and we disagree on this point as far as like landslide victory, close victory, whatever. But both of us obviously think that a Trump presidency that is not the route that's not good. That's not it. But I think we have to be prepared for either scenario, right? So I want to ask, and then I'll answer as well. What's the worst that could happen if Trump wins?
So here's the thing, and I tried, and let me preface it by saying this: America has some of the strongest institutions in the world. We are the light on the hill for democracies. We have the oldest constitution that's still active. All of that was threatened on January 6th. All of that. We were downgraded in the eyes of the world from a very stable country to not as much when they almost killed our vice president at the time. They were saying, hang Mike Pence. And Donald Trump did nothing about this. Now, I'm not one of these people that thinks Donald Trump cares about any of the stuff he talks about. He cares about power, he cares about money, and he cares about making himself and his buddies rich. Just like he said in the recent video, he said, you guys are rich as hell. I'm going to give you all tax breaks. That's his goal. How he gets there is through manipulating Republicans and basically fascism. Now, when you say fascism, people are like, oh, Dell, come on, that can't be right. But somehow, if you call Kamala Harris a communist, that'll stick. But Donald Trump, who is actually behaving like a fascist according to his generals, according to everybody who was around him, 40 out of 44 members of his cabinet have refused to endorse him, saying he's dangerous for the country. So my point is, oh, and by the way, because of Donald Trump, now we have a Supreme Court decision expanding presidential immunity. And what we're doing is we're setting up the country to have a king. We're setting up our democracy to fall, and we're weakening our institutions, and we're making the executive branch of the government too powerful. And that is Donald Trump's goal. Donald Trump's goal is to have power and to not have it come along with any sort of accountability. As we know from Spider Man, great power comes with great responsibility. And I think we have to keep it that way in this country. The worst that happens realistically if Donald Trump is elected is he fills another Supreme Court seat.
Or two.
There's people that are old enough that will
Yep.
retire if he wins. He fills more seats in courts. He expands the executive power. And I would give it pretty fair odds that he tries to remove the limitations on term limits and he tries to establish himself for a third term. And I think that a lot of things, Republicans want to move a lot of things to the states, and it's easier to do that when you have the presidency. And if that happens, and I know people don't think too much about this because this is like maybe a micro, it's a second level kind of thinking. It's states' rights. The problem with states' rights is that you end up with a country where you have human rights in one country, you don't have it in another, or in one state, and you don't have it in another. And that's what we have now. We have women who will die because they can't be afforded health care in one state. And if they were in California, they'd be just fine. We have one state that's banning books, Florida, and we have states that are
Expanding education.
against LGBT rights. They're banning, yeah, all sorts
Yeah.
of education. And what's coming up next is gay marriage. That's going to be on the chopping block. And if you think it's not, just think about how secure you were about abortion rights just 5 years ago. How rock solid 50 years of solid abortion rights were, how solid that was until they weren't. And that's how quickly things can change. So, to answer the question, I think that a Trump presidency is going to destabilize the country, and a lot of people are going to feel it in restricting their rights and restricting their
Yeah. What
freedoms.
about Harris?
Well, VP Harris, I think, I mean, it's hard for me to say what the worst thing is going to be. I think that what happens, honestly, the worst thing is she doesn't get a lot done. The worst thing that happens is that, and if you're a Republican, you'll be happy to hear this, right? Because you may be thinking, well, I don't want Donald Trump. I also don't want this liberal agenda pushed by Harris. You might get your way because Democrats aren't going to have the House and the Senate. Very unlikely. And a lot of her policies might just not get done. Like 25,000 first time home buyers sounds great. That's a lot of money. Things like that might just not happen. So what you might end up with is a continuation of the Biden administration, which, as I said from the top, has been wildly successful. So I think that what you get with Harris is you get a continuation of how things are going, which is pretty good. And the worst case is you don't get a lot of the promises that she's been putting out. She may not be effective in actually getting those
Yeah. And the
passed.
unfortunate thing is like it's not necessarily going to be her fault, but I think at the same time, a lot of the arguments, and I think we've talked about this, is like Democrats got to like take the gloves off and fight. Like literally,
Well,
you gotta do something.
Democrats are pussies.
Yeah,
They're
they
pussies.
gotta
That's just there's no way to
yeah
way to say it.
they gotta do something. But I would answer the question, and I would say very similarly. Like I think that we have institutions and systems in place and checks and balances and everything like that that have stood the test of time over and over and over again, and they were pulled to the very brink on January 6th. And at every single turn, we have a man in Donald Trump who literally does not care. Does not care. And I was reading an article the other day who said that Republicans will bow to me. Like they're going to evolve. And
Mm.
I don't care.
Yep.
Like I'm going to steamroll them. And that has happened.
Yep.
Everybody that has said that they're going to stand up to him, everybody that has, basically called him Hitler, is his VP, is stumping for him, is a MAGA person who said, I have seen the light.
Yep.
And I think that a Trump presidency would not inch us closer. But I think you're exactly right, Goose. I don't think that he would want to leave office after that third term if he survives a second term. That's not saying on an assassination attempt. I legitimately think his health and mental state is declining.
Yeah. I mean, he's
Yeah.
81.
Um,
Same
the
arguments
same
against
exact arguments.
Biden.
Like I don't know if he makes it through the full term. Yeah, I think that legitimately, when we look at the definition of fascism or of a fascist, he is it. He is it. And I think we need to take his threats, his words seriously. And I don't like the language that I hear from particularly white people who talk about these institutions and systems and all this stuff that they're going to check them with this new Supreme Court case. Like, I don't know if that's actually going to hold because all he has to do is say is like, "Oh, I'm the president," essentially. Yeah, like yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think when we're talking about stopping it, I think it's not just voting, but like being willing to use his own words, fight like hell, right? And I'm not talking about like physical fighting and all that stuff. I'm talking about like
Oh no, you're inciting violence. I heard it. This guy's
yeah,
inciting
but
violence,
I think
folks.
it really is being wary on the people that say don't be wary. That like we get lackadaisical in believing that he is not a threat, even
Yeah.
after if even if Harris wins. And I agree with you. Like I think it's going to be tough. I think a lot of the things that we see, it would require her to get a second term. It would require them to win back the House and Senate
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
2026. But he's not going to go quietly in the night. He's already setting the
No.
groundwork for it to be a
Exactly.
grueling 2, 3, 4 months until whatever happens, right? And I would encourage folks to check out John Oliver's last week tonight, his most recent episode on the election. Like it was really good, where he breaks down some of the groundwork that's actually being laid on undermining the election of not just Trump,
Yeah.
but cronies of Trump in different districts across the state, particularly in Georgia. there are election leaders that are already putting in legislation, rules, policies to basically bottleneck the election process and voting process. So
Yeah, they're trying to muddy the
yeah,
waters already. They're
yeah.
setting up for it.
So just being mindful and aware of those things, like it's coming, and like not willing to just allow it to happen. Because like I think that that's the thing about democracy that we sometimes forget, and I even forget as somebody who again studied it for 4 years, is like we have a significant amount of power, and like we are made to believe that we don't. Like as separate
Yeah.
individuals, as like when we talk about even race, class, gender, whatever, like when we legitimately come together, create like some level of rainbow coalition, we literally things can happen, and we have significant power and movement that we can enact. So I think that that's the thing that we have to keep in mind, regardless of which way that this goes. Gustavo thinks that this is gonna be a Kamala landslide victory. I do not. I think it's gonna be very close, but we're gonna see in a few days here. As of October 30th of us recording, we're gonna see.
Landslide incoming
We'll
next
see.
week. Yeah, to your point, I think especially for younger people, if you're like 18 to 25 listening to this podcast, you got to get involved. The problem with the problem if you don't, Harris actually has said this, is the power you have when you're a kid, when you're younger, young adults, is voting. You may not have a lot of influence elsewhere at your job or whatever, but you have a vote. And decisions are going to be made for you if you don't want to voice your opinion. Everything that's going to happen in this election, everything that happens in your local elections, everything that happens in your state elections is going to affect you directly. And unless you want people who are, the average age of a government representative is in the 60s, unless you want boomers making decisions for you, you have to get involved. And it doesn't take you very long. I mean, even with, back in the day, you'd have to read a booklet and read all kinds of stuff. Now you could probably go on TikTok and look up an initiative and look up, we didn't even get through. I mean, we could do a whole other podcast on just the
Oh my
California
gosh, yeah.
initiatives. But you could watch video on those and make a decision, make an informed decision, because that's going to affect you directly. And that's how you have your voice heard, is
Yep.
voting.
And I mean, when you talk about getting involved beyond voting, you can call your representative, you can email them, you can go to their office. Like they legitimately work for us. And we and
100%.
and I don't think that we should forget that, right? And we can hold them accountable. So anytime they don't want to talk to us, we can continue to show up, and they can't tell us not to show up. Like you work for me. You have to listen to me. You know what I'm saying? Like what
I mean,
yeah,
that's
like
facts.
we can
That's
schedule
true.
appointments with them. They're not these big bad famous people that like can have walls and walls and walls of security to keep us from talking to them and have access to them. Like that's not how it's supposed to go. That's not how this works. Trump wants it to be that way, but that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Cool.
Amen.
These are great last thoughts. Great pod. We said 45 minutes. We went for an hour 20. Amazing.
Perfect.
Dope,
As
my friend.
planned.
Well, do you want to plug anything? Say anything? I mean, yeah,
No, I mean, I'll plug
yeah.
myself. If you got, if you're in the LA area or Orange County, Southern California, you have a personal injury action or a habitability case, lead poisoning, carbon monoxide poisoning, anything like that, any sort of landlord negligence, or if you just need a lawyer, you don't know any lawyers. I mean, where I came from, I'm the first lawyer I knew. I came up with nobody. If you're a law student, you want some advice, you can hit me up. You can go to RileyErsoff.com. You'll see my profile. My email is Gustavo, just my name at RileyErsoff.com. Shoot me an email. Like I said, if you need guidance, if you need help, you're looking for a lawyer, hit me up. I'll
There it
help you out.
is. There it is. Gustavo, thank you so much for coming through, my friend. This was amazing. Dropped some heavy stuff, and hopefully, folks are tuning in. Didn't check out for us political science nerds.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.